introduce Vikram Mahadevan, who is with us as the high school representative. Welcome.
Thank you.
I hope you'll ask a lot of tough questions. I wanted to remind everybody that on March 14th, which is the next school committee after this, the school committee meeting will start at 6:15 instead of 6 o'clock. It's a very important event that has to happen beforehand. We have to take the school committee picture for this year. And so we're going to do it at that time. As always, we have a calendar which shows a variety of meetings, both of the school committee and its subcommittees, and also the superintendent's forums that are planned for the next month or so. And having done that, I would bring your attention to the administrative business and ask if there is a motion for the consent agenda. Say again?
No. I don't think we have consent. We don't have.
Just the past record. Oh, I'm sorry. Okay, so no, we don't have that record yet. So there is no consent agenda. So we're on to subcommittee reports. And Madam Kershaw, we'll start with you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The Finance Subcommittee met most recently, 24 hours ago, last evening to discuss the budget message for 2014 from the superintendent, which we'll be hearing about later today. So I will yield to that presentation.
Very good.
The next meeting of the Finance Subcommittee is Monday, March 11th at 8:30 here at Town Hall.
Let's see. Ms. Chalupsky is not here. She is enjoying herself elsewhere for this committee meeting. And so, Ms. Scotto, is there anything you can think of that should be added at this time? Sorry to take you by surprise.
The only thing is that there is a capital subcommittee meeting on March 8th.
Correct.
That people should know about, at which I believe we are discussing the space issues for next year. Other than that, I have nothing else.
Probably discussing some of the new school concepts coming up.
Yes.
Right. And that will be the school committee's chance. I just offer to everyone the school committee's chance to participate in that discussion before it comes up the following Monday with the B-Space Committee. Ms. Scotto, up again for curriculum.
Indeed. Well, I would like to report that we just had a very interesting curriculum subcommittee meeting. It was one of our school improvement plan meetings where we met with two different principals. The first one who spoke tonight was Vicki Milstein, speaking about the early education program in Brookline. And she gave a very comprehensive view of the program, looking in particular at the way the early education program meets the needs of vulnerable students, actually taking over from, in terms of the intervention program, 3 years, though the safety net in Brookline is 15 months. And these children are in the BEAP program. They go in the summer to the launch program. They are in with many, many students who are not at all vulnerable. It's a mixed class. It isn't just a class of vulnerable students. And there are tutorial programs so that when these children, all of these children in the early education move into kindergarten, they are generally very well prepared. And they're, if they need to have IEPs in place, we in the school system already know what their issues are. It was an absolutely wonderful presentation in that it made you realize exactly how much in the forefront of early education we are with our BEEP program. Our second speaker was Deb Holman at the high school, so we went from one end of the career, one age to the very other end of the age. And she talked about the state of the school. She is a new headmaster this year, and she talked in part about her first impressions, that there was a strong and engaged faculty, broad challenging curriculum, interesting thinking students. She had many things. One thing that impressed me was she talked about play and how, in a sense, play is structured into the school life, that there are various events that take place in school that everyone, faculty and students, participate in. And you think, well, why would you want play structured into a high school program? Well, the fact of the matter is that it is one way of building a very strong community. And that, I think, has become quite clear to her, what a strong community of teachers and students we have in Brookline. She talked about many other things. I could go on for far longer than I have time to go on. She talked about challenges, the increasing enrollments, the tighter budgets, the need for new technology, some of the new things that we're looking at this year, the evaluation system, the new bullying law, how you use collaborative time at the high school, which will be built into the schedule. And she looked at some of the efficiencies that she has put in place, the different structure for the administrative team meetings, all kinds of interesting things that I think were very informative and which really gave us a sense of, first of all, what a vital, alive place Brookline High School is, how much time she has really taken to look at the culture and the nature of the school, and how she is thinking deeply about the ideas that she would like to work on over the next few years. So it was a most informative meeting for us. The next curriculum committee meeting will take place. It will be a meeting with the Capital Committee, a joint meeting on March 8th, where we will look at the new school ideas that I just said, under the new school ideas and how we're dealing with enrollment next year, and how that will impact the curriculum. And that will take place on Friday, March 8th at
10 o'clock.
10 o'clock in the morning. Thank you. That's it, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Ms. Gatto. Questions from Ms. Gatto? Seeing none. Ms. Stone, anything from Government Relations?
No, Mr. Chairman, thank you. There is no report from Government Relations.
Very succinct, thank you.
Except for tomorrow's sequester.
Dr. Warren, negotiations.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. There's nothing to report.
Understood. Ms. Stone, back to you for policy review.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This one I am more prepared for. I apologize to all of you that you got this so late, but this is a first read, so there is an opportunity to take a look at it and work through it tonight. This is not a long policy. As you may recall, we were the subcommittee was charged originally with reviewing the CORI policy, because there had been changes to the law, and we needed to reflect that in our policy. And in reviewing the CORI policy, it became clear that that the policy manual needed. I beg your pardon, Ms. Kershaw. Do you need to?
Pardon me, Madam Chairwoman.
I
I'm
was
so
not-
sorry to
not coming up with
interrupt.
that. I'm sorry.
Due to my employment with the Department of Children and Families, I've been advised by counsel to recuse myself from deliberation, reading, and discussion on this item, so I will do that now, and please let the record reflect.
Thank you. I apologize for launching into it before giving you that opportunity. So just again, just the background, it was clear that that there is in our use of criminal background checks, there is more than just the CORI that goes into that, and it made sense to create a policy about criminal background checks and not to have a separate policy about CORI. So we went back, reviewed that, worked with town council, and so that is what you're looking at here. This is a new policy on criminal history checks for employees, volunteers, and others. And it covers both what we've all gotten used to with the CORI, which is the criminal offender record information. It also has now the new fingerprint-based criminal background checks, the new law, and makes reference to our use of the sex offender registry information, or SORI, as we refer to it here. All of our use of background checks, as the preamble says, is to ensure a safe teaching and learning environment, and to follow the General Law 71, Section 38R, which is having to do with criminal offender record information. All of these are for determining the suitability of current and prospective PSB public schools employees, volunteers, and others who may have direct and unmonitored contact with students in the public schools. Again, the direct and unmonitored is a phrase that is repeated here. That's from the law, and that's why we need these policies to be in place. The CORI policy has not changed that much. CORI needs to be accessed periodically, not less than every 3 years. So it's the change that we were putting in place is that it used to be that CORI was a one-time thing. It now has to be periodically updated, so this is in compliance with that change in the law. Fingerprint-based criminal background checks. I'm just going to read this so it's very clear what we're doing. Again, this is a new piece of law that we are complying with. Public Schools of Brookline shall obtain a state and national fingerprint-based criminal background check for all current and prospective employees of the school department who may have direct and unmonitored contact with children, for all individuals who regularly provide school-related transportation to children, and for any subcontractor or laborer commissioned by the school committee or school to perform work on school grounds who may have direct and unmonitored contact with children, including but not limited to employees of extended day and or other after-school programs that are regularly conducted on public schools property. You all know that CORI is only a Massachusetts-based background check. The fingerprint background checks are designed to extend the search, essentially, to other states as well. The sex offender registry information is not something that we look at as a matter of course. The public schools simply are going to request SORI data from the Brookline Police Department on an annual basis for the purpose of determining the suitability of current and prospective employees and volunteers. So that's just a review. If the police department maintains that list, the administration will simply ask to see it once a year and look it over. The procedures, this is a long paragraph on procedures. The Department of Criminal Justice has a model CORI policy. We are planning on complying with all of those procedures having to do with screening, having to do with training, the use of the backgrounds in screening, verifying identities, all of those things. This is essentially just repeating what's in the law, and that's that piece here. Number 3 is simply committing us to the training of personnel, because all personnel authorized to conduct CORI and fingerprint-based criminal background checks have to be familiar with the laws and regulations. Confidentiality is very important to all of this for what is, I hope, obvious reason, and so access to this information is again constrained by law, but we write it out here as only those individuals who are authorized to have such access. And in the matter of any fees for the processing and administration of any of these background checks, if they are required by law. Again, any public school employee or prospective employee required under the law to submit to registration in any or all criminal background registries shall be responsible for any fees related to the processing of that registration, unless such fee is waived due to financial hardship on the part of the employee or applicant. We're obviously going to consider those as we go forward, and that is it in its entirety. Happy to take questions.
Questions for Ms. Stone? Ms. Ditkoff?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So, in English, what's the difference between a public school employee and, let's say, a parent chaperone on a field trip? Meaning, is there a different level of scrutiny? I mean, right now, parent volunteers have to fill out Corey forms anyway. And I'm curious what this does to that, if there's a different level of scrutiny or not.
Sure, go ahead, Bill.
It does nothing to change that. The Corey requirement still exists for parents who are in a role where they have direct access to students. We overinterpret that, if anything. We require that all volunteers, anyone who's associated with those kinds of activities, field trips, PTO activities, complete that, be on the list that are Corey'd. The fingerprint law does not, has not gone that far. The Corey law did not when it began. But there's no discussion that I've heard about extending that law. The SORI information, however, when we request it, and we've actually mandated here that we do it once a year. We actually have that discussion more often than that. But we look mainly at employees, but we also look at parents, residents who appear on those lists and take appropriate measures. Those people who were on those lists would not get through to chaperone or be involved in school activities. Am I answering your question at all?
Yes.
Oh, good.
95% of it. So just so I'm clear, so Corey used to be not required for volunteers, let's say parent volunteers on field trips, and it is now?
When Corey began, it was required upon initial hire, period.
Okay.
It was then expanded, and I can't remember which came first. It was then expanded to this maximum of every 3 years, and to include volunteers. Those provisions are still in place.
And I got the thing about the fingerprints, the sex offender registry, remind me where, because it says current and prospective employees and volunteers. So we are not over complying, we are complying. Is that fair? Or are we over complying?
No, that's fair.
Okay. And that list, it's not just a list of registered sex offenders in Brookline, it's a list in Massachusetts, or what is it?
What we mainly correspond with the police department around is in Massachusetts. They have the ability to give us the list beyond that, which we use mainly for employees.
Okay, got it. Thank you.
Ms. Cox?
The part that pertains to after-school programs, and it says it's commissioned by school committee, so would that apply to enrichment programs and other after-school activities that are going on in the schools?
My interpretation is that it does.
That was our conversation at subcommittee, that as long as it's not a one-off event, anything that is regularly scheduled and therefore sponsored in some way by the schools would be subject to this.
Ms. Ditkoff again?
I have one more question, sorry. So do we get some sort of, well, I know the answer to this is no, but what information do we get back from Corey that would lead someone in the district to make a determination that yes, it is okay, or no, it isn't okay? Because if anything shows up on the Corey, or if certain things show up, I mean, just what actually happens?
So there's, and I can't remember which document it's in. It's actually will be part of the procedures that spells out what we look for, because the state's provided sort of a guideline to do that. No, the fact that something might appear on a Corey does not necessarily disqualify someone. We look at the age of those events, whether they led to convictions or resolution without a finding. There are many different elements that we'll look at on a Corey before making that determination.
But then there's some communication back to that individual.
Absolutely.
saying,
There's a
"I'm sorry."
There's a discussion that goes on whenever we're in a situation where we're even considering something that might be on a Corey. The assistant superintendent meets with that employee.
And parent also, same thing?
Yes, although they tend to be done at the building level, but they are often done in consultation with the assistant superintendent because she has that expertise. But yes, a similar thing would occur.
So I have a question about fingerprinting. Once somebody has been fingerprinted, if later on they are involved in something with which we would be uncomfortable, would we find that out, or must we initiate another fingerprint operation in order to find that out?
We don't initiate the fingerprint. The fingerprint background check is initiated by law for certain kinds of jobs. So it's not something we're asking people to do. It's something that the law tells them they have to do if they are going to do the following things. So I'm not sure, I mean, if somebody is arrested while employed with us, presumably we would know about that.
Yeah. There are. Well, that has to do with relationship with police departments and those kinds of things. So, but that goes beyond the fingerprint law.
Right.
So, I don't know all the answers to the implementation of this law in this state yet. So most of what I say on this topic is around an implementation of a fingerprint law in another state that I'm familiar with.
Got it.
Where we were required, the main difference between the Corey and the fingerprint laws that existed in Pennsylvania was that the fingerprint was something you carried with you. You had to have in order to apply for the job. So my understanding is in this law there are going to be centers where people can go and have that done. My expectation is that those people who are coming in will have to have it as part of their application process. There's a whole different process that will be done, according to what I've read of the law, over a 3-year period for present employees. And no, at this point in time, my understanding is it is a single event.
So it just sounds to me as though the fingerprinting is not effective, if you want to use that word, in terms of in terms of any information that we would need in another state.
I disagree.
Okay.
I think
Good.
it's very effective. What it's not doing that you're alluding to is being effective on an ongoing basis. It is effective in that hiring process. Remember, this discussion originated in this state because we have a law. We're one of those states that only has a law that gives us information about things that happen in Massachusetts.
Right.
And as some of the newspapers have documented, there are countless episodes that have happened outside of the state where people have ended up in the employ of public school systems and had information available from other states that was not available through those checks, through the system that we currently have now. So it is an improvement. It does give us information on present employees in that 3-year period. It does give us information on all new employees coming in. It remains to be seen if, like the Corey law, it will unfold in some way that requires this regularly down the road. That is not part of the present law. But no, it is, in my opinion, it is an improvement.
Okay, so I guess if there was something that we should know about in another state as a result of the fingerprint, we would find out about it that we would not have found out before. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay.
And I think just for the record, to be very clear, we are not, with this policy or with this law, asking people to go get fingerprinted. They are required, if they are a prospective employee, to have been fingerprinted so that we can run a fingerprint-based background check.
Well, again,
But-
I'm sorry.
Right, so all I'm saying is that I was just worried when you were referring to the fingerprinting, it's like, we are not
I understand that, yes. Thank you.
Okay.
So that's a good clarification for my,
Right.
So I still have my card from the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, and that card was stamped. You may have had a similar experience. That card was stamped to show that I had cleared, and I would produce that when I would apply for a job. I don't know if this law, again, we don't know some of the particulars of this law. In Pennsylvania, if you applied for another job, you had to produce a new fingerprint card that was 6 months or less old. Okay, so you couldn't bring that one from 10 years ago onto the new job. You had to go and have a new one produced. That may or may not be the case here. So we will get to a point where everyone upon initial hire, I believe, can produce a recent, clean fingerprint card or a record of some sort. Does that
and
make
after
sense?
3 years, everyone who is already in our employ, right?
No, yes, in the first 3 years, all present employees will
Right.
have to do that. That's the law. But it's not a regular 3-year cycle
No, I
like the Corey
understand,
law.
I understand, right. Okay, thanks, that,
And there are lots of reasons that people get fingerprinted that would not show up in this
Oh.
particular check. This is just if your fingerprints show up in a criminal background check, right? So anybody who's ever gone through a security clearance.
Correct.
Right, is good, but that's not going to show up in something like this, so.
Right. Are there other questions? Okay, this is a first reading, so,
So there are no, clarifications, I just want to be clear that there are no requests for any changes or for language to be clearer in the actual draft?
I sent a couple of minor,
I saw those, yes, thank you.
I didn't think they were worth discussion here.
No, and anyway.
Yeah.
They were, you were looking at a prior draft.
That's true, I was. Okay,
Okay, thank you all. We will move that to a second reading then at our next available
on
times of,
the 14th, March 14th?
on the 14th?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Are there additional liaisons that people would like to talk about? Mr. Chang, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I attended the Climate Action Committee meeting this past Monday, and for those of you who are interested in solar power, be ready for some interesting proposals that's coming to Brookline. Climate Action Committee applied to Solarize Mass on behalf of Brookline last week, and you asked what is Solarize Mass. Well, Solarize Mass is part of the Patrick administration's push in 2011 to install up to 250 megawatts of solar power by 2017. And in its first year, 4 communities were selected, and last year there were 17, and Brookline is applying this year. And what it gives you, if one selected, is a $2,500 marketing budget to really put the word out in your community about what is available in terms of solar installation. And one of the installer called Next Step Living is participating. And what you do is the more houses that apply for solar power, your installation cost actually goes down dramatically. So stay tuned, and we're supposed to be notified on the 14th to see if Brookline is application is accepted. If so, then there's going to be a general push by the Climate Action Committee to get the word out about this product. Thank you.
Is that for municipal buildings as well as?
Municipal buildings is a separate thing that's going on, but this is primarily for multifamily or single-family houses. So, and what's nice about Next Step Living is that they're able to provide financing to some degree to defray the initial cost of putting in solar panels. So, that's all I have.
Great. So we all need to sign up as soon as we hear from you. Yes, Ms. Kershaw.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This week was the monthly meeting of the Special Education Parent Advisory Committee, where they discussed the extended school year program for children on IEPs who qualify for that, and the relationship between that and opportunities for participating in the recreation department's camp programs. The recreation department was there presenting as well, which was really helpful to have the parts of the town collaborating around serving kids. They also provided an update on some of the special education activities happening at the high school, and I would say that parents are continuing to feel both hopeful and nervous about the many changes that are being put in underway at the high school. I did want to recognize the headmaster, who's had one public meeting with the parents and has 2 more scheduled, and I think that is a really important piece of the puzzle, that they know exactly what's happening and what changes are underway, and so they felt very much like there was a spirit of collaboration and communication around what the changes are. And I also think that we'll hear a little bit, I think, about some of the actions the administration's taking to really address some of the changes and support some of the resources that are needed at the high school. So I'm hopeful that we'll continue to be able to have and hear about positive progress at the high school from our parents over there. I also wanted to just mention to the school committee members that the members of the Special Education Parent Advisory Committee are interested in inviting you all to a coffee meet and greet so that they can share with you special education issues that they hear about in the schools. So that will probably happen in May or June, and I hope you'll be able to join. I advised them how to make it as least impactful for you as possible. So hopefully they'll follow that advice. And then finally, CPAC is hosting a Basic Rights in Special Education, which is a workshop for parents and professionals that focuses on the rights that parents have under the Individuals with Disabilities Act, the Massachusetts Special Education Law, and the No Child Left Behind Law. That's going to be a workshop delivered by the Federation for Special Needs, which has a lot of experience in delivering these kind of workshops. It's free to the public or anyone else who wants to attend. It's Wednesday, March 6th at Devotion from 6:30 to 8:30 p.m., and there's information on the CPAC website about it.
Great, thank
Thank you.
you. Questions for Ms. Kershaw? Seeing none. Other liaisons? Yes, Ms. Titkoff.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The work of the Strategic Plan Committee continues apace. We are having a wonderful set of discussions about high achievement for all. What does that mean? What does rigor mean? What does it look like? Educational equity, both in its academic forms and its structural forms, meaning are there barriers to equity that we should be thinking about and paying attention to? The links between rigor and equity and ensuring that those are in one conversation so that, again, it's high achievement for all. Discussions about technology and other models that we can be learning from. So a good set of discussions that are both in the committee meeting and something that we're hoping to bring to the broader community. We're also looking at the values, and there's some good updating language around the values, things that might have been the way one said things in the past, like respect for human differences, which might be more updated to say cultural proficiency, things like that. So there's some updating, which Ms. Stone is cringing about, which is always a good sign. So I just wanted to give people the opportunity to understand that there'll be a number of different opportunities to both hear from and express their thoughts on various topics. In terms of hearing from folks, we will have at least 2 parent forums. The first one was canceled due to the snowstorm overhang, but now the first one will be next Thursday, March 7th. Did something go out on Connect Ed yet, or no? It'll go out soon. Oh, you're going to say something? Oh, good. Okay, sorry. Never mind. I didn't want to steal thunder. So, great. Just write it down next week, next Thursday. And then there'll be at least one more. And then the other thing that is happening is some learning series, which we've alluded to over the process of constructing this committee, which is that there really is such a rich vein of expertise in Brookline for us to be tapping into, and elsewhere, not just Brookline, but certainly some parents and experts that we have in the community about various topics, such as the Strategic Data Project that's run out of Harvard and places data fellows in districts around the country. Some of that expertise is in our backyard and in parents in one of our schools, as a matter of fact. Things around new technology, learning modes, different models. So we're having some learning sessions around that and doing readings around that, and we will bring a set of experts to this group and over the course of the next 6 weeks or so between now and April vacation. Due to scheduling, it might spill over, but we're really trying to focus it on the next few school committee meetings. So scheduling is TBD, but it's underway around our next 3 school committee meetings, so hopefully we'll have at least a couple people in each of those. So the next steps are that we are going to bring a draft, the committee will discuss a draft, and then at some point, Dr. Fisher-Mueller and I are trying to figure out what's the right time to bring it to this group to see and hear about before it goes back to, before it gets finalized in any form. So that's all under discussion as well. So if anyone has questions, we're happy to talk through it, but we are looking forward to hearing expert voices and hearing other voices, community voices, parent voices over the course. And, oh, sorry, I should have mentioned the Teaching and Learning Council. I don't know exactly how it's called, right? So there's a group of teachers and a cross-functional group of people in the district that Dr. Fisher-Mueller will be having this conversation with as well. So stay tuned.
Questions for Ms. Ditkoff?
This is not a question, but merely a statement. I really encourage the Strategic Planning Committee to be rigorous in its assessment of the differences between, say, a learning expectation, which is where cultural proficiency might fall, and a value, which is why it's expressed the way it is in the current set of values.
Taken from the author of the current set of values, so noted.
Thank you, Ms. Ditkoff. Are there other? Well, I'll just fill in a little bit about the B-Space meeting, which occurred this past Monday, the 22nd of February, and covered 3 basic subjects. One, a series of alternative locations which might have been under consideration in addition to the old Lincoln School for the possibility of a new school, a pro forma budget, both capital and operating, in connection with possible new school, and options that we might consider taking in order to avoid initiating a new school. And the locations were the Lynch Center, the Baldwin area, and the Brookline Music School, possible locations, and we explained why they weren't going to be feasible for a new school. The pro forma budget, we had some discussions about the extent to which the budget was connected with any student growth at all, no matter where it was placed, and those expenses which would be unique to the initiation of a new school. And the options that we would need, the kinds of actions we'd need to take to avoid opening a new school and creating the space in some other way, included dealing with the METCO program, the materials fee program, larger class sizes, and modular classrooms, and also a discussion of basically eliminating the neighborhood school concept so that the superintendent could place students wherever he needed to place them because there was available space. And subject to 2 public meetings where we will hear from the public, the committee seemed to feel that those activities that I described, particularly because they would all have to be included, would not justify by any means not opening a new school. But we want to wait to hear what the public has to say. Ms. Stone? I can see you looking at me quizzically.
It's always, the conversations at the B-Space Committee are always a lot to take in and very difficult to summarize, so I congratulate you on on being able to make it through so succinctly. But I think it's important, just for the record and so everybody understands, that everything that Mr. Morse just described are simply data points that the committee has asked to look at. So because the charge is to consider one of the major options to consider in meeting our enrollment challenges of the next 10 to 20 years, was whether or not we needed a new school, essentially a new school, in order to create the number of spaces that we need. So in looking at all of those other options, the committee was essentially just asking for the data on, well, what if we did this, or what if we did that? How many classrooms would we get out of random assignment of students? How many classrooms would we get out of reducing or eliminating programs like materials fee or METCO? How many classrooms would we get out of doing all of those other things? And so it's really just walking through all of the other possibilities of creating space within the system. What would we get? How much more can we carve up the existing schools? How many classrooms do we get? And in the course of looking at all of these options and all of the data that's available, every time the committee asks for something, we look at the financial implications, so the budgetary implications. We look at the effect on the school system as a whole. So we look very much at our values and where whatever it is we're talking about changing sits and what it means to people in the community to have that. And we look at the bottom line of, will it actually create the space that we need, which has now been set, given current and future projections, at least the minimum is that we need 18 classrooms in addition to the 46 that we have already created over the next many years. And so that's why at the last meeting, as we were looking at all of the other options, it became clear that even in combination, a lot of those other options would not yield us that many classrooms. And so the committee, I think, was feeling pretty positive at the end of the last conversation that the only way to move forward with that many class spaces, and to do it in a way that advances the objectives of our learning community of the public schools of Brookline, is to consider options for a new school. And to do that, and because, as Mr. Morse also said, because the other spaces that we hold, the other spaces in town that the town owns or that the schools already own, do not yield the kind of room that we would need for that endeavor. That's why we're looking at Old Lincoln as the place to start. So it's just, I'm sorry to sort of go back over that, but a lot of them, when they get said out loud, when you say things out loud, like giving the superintendent, for example, the option of placing students anywhere he'd like, it's not to say that the committee was looking at that as a viable option. It simply had to look at it as one of the options to see what it would yield us in terms of classroom space.
Well said. And the committee, I will add that the committee asked, as part of its charge, for us to consider beyond the adequacy of the capacity of a new school, what we would do, what the options would be beyond that if the growth continues.
In the event that 18 is...
Right. Yes, Dr. Warren.
Is the B-Space Committee also considering the implications for the program of renovation of schools in the future?
You mean beyond devotion?
Yes, I mean, if we have an installed base of, 10
Yes.
elementary schools, and they will need to be renovated every, 25, 30, 40 years, then that presumes a renovation every X years, so there'll have to be capacities for the schools to accommodate those students during the renovations, et cetera.
Yes, so, yes, that's one of the questions that arises, which is assuming that we're going to need more capacity, that even if we did it at the old Lincoln School, that will provide, then what do we do after that? And also, will the old Lincoln School then be available, as you say, for other renovations to move students? Yes, right.
That was in fact explicitly raised as part of the conversation, because that's the most obvious implication of Old Lincoln being used as a permanent school building or a more permanent school building. But as everybody will recall from the concept studies for the Devotion School project, that project is already being looked at. Because Old Lincoln wouldn't have fit Devotion anyway, that project is already being looked at as a project that may have to go forward without swing space being available to us. So we've already started adapting to the possibility of not having that building.
Other questions? Hearing none. Ms. Coyne, is there anyone who wishes to speak publicly? So we have 3 people who would like to speak, and they are welcome to do so. And it's Robin Hunter, Sharon Gamberg, and Mark Jones, I think. And I'll ask each person to speak no more than 3 minutes. And for those of you who are not familiar with public comments, we're unlikely. It's not a debate, and therefore we are unlikely to respond to those comments, which does not at all mean that we don't appreciate them. We do. But this is not the venue for a debate about whatever you want to say. So why don't I just go in order? Robin Hunter, please.
Good evening. My name is Robin Hunter. I have 3 children at Driscoll School. They're in first grade, kindergarten, and pre-K2 in Mary Dunn's class. I'm here again tonight to follow up on the situation of moving Mary's class outside of Driscoll and to express families' earnest wishes that this not happen. I attended the February 7th forum hosted by Dr. Lupini, where I outlined several alternative spaces within Driscoll that could be considered for a possible 4th kindergarten at Driscoll next year if need be, thereby making it possible to not disrupt Mary at this incredibly traumatic time in her personal life and the many families that would be affected. I followed up with Dr. Lupini regarding these spaces, and we worked out that I would be referred on to Peter Rowe. After several more follow-up attempts, I recently learned from Vice Principal David Euclid at Driscoll that Peter Rowe, along with a team of architects, had already been into Driscoll to measure potential new classroom spaces, and we now await that report. I'm not sure if this is all accurate because Mr. Euclid has a lot on his plate right now, but we think that's where things stand. I know I speak on behalf of hundreds of BEEP families as evidenced by the petition you all received when I say that it's simply not consistent with our high ethics and caring standards of the Brookline Public Schools to consider moving Mary Dunn from the community and family who supports her daily and whom she serves and has served for nearly 3 decades. This is a really, really bad time to do this. It reflects poorly on us. If you watch the news, read the news, or even live in this community, you can't escape what's going on with her right now. It's embarrassing that we're even considering doing this. There are a million other reasons I oppose this, but I stand here on behalf of Mary tonight. I look forward to helping you figure this out and making a decision. I think that we can figure something out and making it a decision that we can bear to live with. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Hunter. Sharon Gamberg. Ms. Gamberg, I'll just ask you, is this a different issue or the same issue?
It's a different issue.
Thank you.
Thank you for hearing me tonight, Mr. Chairman and committee. Maybe my comments are precipitous. My name is Sharon Grimberg. I'm a parent at Lawrence School. I'm also on the ECS Parent Advisory Committee. And I just wanted to speak out and advocate for ECS tonight and to talk about catering for our most advanced accelerated students who I feel deserve equal attention. And we've been talking tonight about equitable access to equality in education, and the truth is that kids who are accelerated and are not catered for in the school system, whose parents can afford to, will provide them with extracurricular activities to cater for them. The website, the Brookline School's website cites a report, A Nation Deceived, which talks about how accelerated children are being deceived and underserved by the nation's public schools. ECS is just a small piece to help give them extra challenge in school. So I really urge the committee, when thinking about the budgets in the next week or the weeks that come up, I know there are preliminary considerations to cut support for teachers in classrooms to provide differentiated learning. I urge you to reconsider that and to continue the program and to continue providing for our accelerated children. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Mr. Jones.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. I appreciate the chance to speak tonight. I wanted to start out by saying thanks to all of you for all of the hard work you do in taking care of our kids. I think many times people come up and they don't mention that. And all of you work very hard to make sure that all of our kids get the education and the educational experience that we would want in this community. I have also risen in response to an anticipation of the superintendent's preliminary budget announcement today. I apologize for sort of jumping the gun. It's sort of when public comment falls during this meeting. I am a parent at the Heath School and one of the Heath School ECS parent coordinators there. And I think that the district does a great job in certain segments of making sure that our students get the services they need. And in certain segments, living up to what I think is a real community value here, that each student is educated to their ability. And we do a great job for some of our students in doing that. What I'm concerned with is that the cutting of the ECS program will dramatically undercut our ability to do that for many of our kids. I think sometimes the ECS program in our community gets, it's misunderstood. It's not understood as an aid to teachers and to students in individualized learning across classrooms. It's rather looked at something that a few kids get here and there. And I think that makes it sometimes more vulnerable than it should be. When we realize that a mark of an adequate school is that we educate everyone up to a certain standard, but the mark of a good school is that we recognize that each of our students is individuals, and that to the greatest extent possible, we educate them to their abilities. And we aid our classroom teachers in doing the same. And when we aid our classroom teachers in providing individualized education, we don't just advantage the children who may be at the top end of the learning spectrum, but we actually help that teacher teach kids at all parts of that learning spectrum. So the ECS program has a ramification for all of the students in our district, and I urge you to reconsider at least the preliminary recommendation of cutting this program entirely. The ECS program really does differentiate Brookline from many of its neighbors, in that it echoes the community value we have here, that we value this education for all of our students and make sure that all of our students can achieve to their abilities. And we have limits, of course, and the budget has limits, of course. But as I look across the budget, at least as the budget from last year, I realize that, for instance,
30 seconds, Mr. Jones.
Yes, that we're spending $384,000 on the ECS program, but $560,000 on athletics, including $325,000 for coaches and $235,000 for student body activities. All these things are important, but the ECS program is central to the core value we have here in educating our students to their individual abilities, and I urge you to find other spots to cut to at least allow some of this program to continue. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, members of the committee.
Thank you, Mr. Jones. Vikram,
Okay.
do you have a report to us?
Yeah, we had a meeting in legislature. Okay. So today there was a meeting of legislature, which we discussed two issues that we've been working on this year. The first one was the new attendance policy for the upcoming school year, and that is mainly to make it easier on teachers in that students don't miss as much class time. So there are less issues with making up work and teachers going out of their way to accommodate for students that are kind of abusing the current attendance policy. And that is that's going to probably pass legislature within this month or the next month. So I'm not entirely sure what the administrative procedure is with that, but I think it's going to come into effect next year. And then the other issue is the technology issue, which is another thing in legislature, which the students in legislature have been concerned with making a more liberal technology policy in terms of personal electronics such as laptops, iPods, and things like that. And that will be discussed after we decide on the attendance policy. That's all.
Thank you very much. Appreciate that. Ms. Holman actually said something about the technology policy at the curriculum subcommittee meeting today. So it's on her mind as well. Thank you. Dr. Lupini.
Thank you, Mr. Morris. The only item in my report this evening is, as promised, I think about a month ago, some of the outcomes, the preliminary outcomes, I'll call them, of our discussions with the building department, the Brookline Police Department, and our leadership team about school safety. So I want to say first, because it's been such a topic in so many districts, that we believe we have very solid procedures in place. Unlike some of our neighbors, we've locked buildings for a number of years. We've had a number of key card access sites for teachers to take kids outside of those buildings and to be able to get back in without propping doors open, which used to be a practice here and still is in other districts. We have a great relationship with the police department, where there are a number of drills that are conducted every year. In addition, some of you may know that the police department uses our buildings out of school time to conduct training exercises. They've done that historically in a number of buildings throughout the district on a regular basis, so that they have a great working knowledge of our buildings and know what to do in those buildings in case of an emergency situation. But we did know we could do things better. And we've talked about a number of issues, some of which involve the police, and quite frankly, some of which involve our own procedures that we'll be working to implement. I want to also, going into this, mention Sean Cronin's outstanding assistance with this in terms of making sure to identify some additional dollars in the FY14 capital improvement plan that could be used to purchase some of the things I'm going to talk about. So there is a source of funding for a number of these things as we move forward. So as I mentioned, we do lock exterior doors, and we have access through designated doors with a camera phone. That camera phone is limited in terms of what it allows us to see. So one of the things that we've talked about is installing a better camera system at each of our doors to give the people who admit people to the buildings a fuller view of who's at the door to come in. And we believe we can easily move forward with that. And again, the building department is costing that out as we speak. We believe that in some buildings, we know that in some buildings, this camera at the front door is not going to be enough. We're going to need a camera in additional locations in that building. One of the discussions, for example, has been about the Driscoll School, and whether we have to move the offices in the Driscoll School or whether we have to put a camera in that hallway to make sure that when we buzz someone in, they don't walk down the hall and not to the office. So we're looking at which of those things we might need to do. Obviously, if we need cameras in hallways, we're going to be discussing that with the capital subcommittee before we would go any further. We are making sure that all of our classroom doors can lock from the inside in a manner that does not allow a student or someone else to accidentally or otherwise lock themselves in the door. But our teachers need to be able to secure their doors from the inside. We're looking for additional locations for automatic swipe operated lock systems. We've been told that at some buildings we don't have enough. So there still is some of that propping that goes on from time to time. So we're looking to add to the number of locations where we have swipe locations so that teachers can get in from the playground. We're looking at our lockdown procedures and trying to build in some flexibility, because one of the things that the police tell us about these kinds of situations is it's nice to go and rehearse a lockdown. It's nice to go and rehearse an evacuation. And sometimes when these situations occur, it's neither and both. And so teachers have to be able to have some ability to make judgment within that. And we're trying to figure out with the police department, how do we build that into our drills? And we're also looking at the feasibility of any of these and other measures at Brookline High School and what makes sense. And Ms. Holman has some great ideas about what we may be able to do to put some of these measures in place while continuing to keep the atmosphere of an open campus at Brookline High School. So we're testing a number of these things there. These things will play out over the next few weeks and months. As I said, the good news is there's money in the capital improvement plan to put them in place. Obviously, there are some that will be coming to the capital subcommittee to talk about before we move forward with them. There are others that, quite frankly, we will move forward with, enhancing the cameras at the doors, for example. We're going to be moving forward with that. The work on doors in classrooms, we're going to be moving forward on that. And that's our plan.
Questions for Dr. Lupini? Well, I will just say that it's another example of the extraordinary collaboration between the building department, which is part of the town, the police, which are part of the town, and the principals and administrators here in the school system, which will put all of this together. And they've been working since the day of the tragedy, and I appreciate that very much. Ms. Stone.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Dr. Lupini, I was just curious, for parents in individual schools, you say you're going to be moving forward on a number of things. I assume that the principals in those schools will be communicating with the parents about what they can expect to see if there are going to be changes at particular schools?
Absolutely. Both in terms of these capital measures and in terms of some procedural measures as to, for example, whether we require identification when people come to the office. Those things we'll do well ahead of time, yes.
Ms. Cotto. Who said so?
You're talking about the doors being blocked open at recess. And it's easy enough for all the staff to have swipe cards to get in those doors. But very often at recess, children go in those doors. Mm-hmm. And if you have a fixed number of adults on recess duty, you may not, depending on where the door is, want the teacher to walk with the child to the door. And it might be 3 or 4 kids during a recess period who have to go, have to go to the bathroom, have to go to a meeting with the teacher or what have you. So it's just a slightly more complex problem for the recess doors. Mm-hmm.
Yep, I agree. That said, we don't believe that blocking open doors is the answer.
Oh, I don't either, but I don't know what I
So we'll have to figure out what the answer is.
But I think it is a more complex problem.
I agree.
Yeah.
Great. Not seeing any other comments, Dr. Lupini, you have the pleasure of sharing with us your budget message. Sorry.
second here. So, thank you, Mr. Morris. Let me start with a couple comments. Let me first say, again, how much I appreciate the additional time that we were provided to put this message together. As you know, I had a family event, family emergency earlier in the month, and this time really gave us the time that we needed to put together a message that would that really allowed us to think through some of the opportunities that we had and some of the challenges that we had. So that's first, thanks, and thanks to my senior staff and leadership team for their great work on this. Second of all, one of the things that this does, in terms of when we're presenting this, because of other things that we know are going to happen, is I'm gonna throw out a I don't know, sort of a wait and see message here tonight. That is that while this is the superintendent's budget message, we know that we will get some pieces of information even within the next 2 weeks. One of the things I'll talk about here in a moment or two is health insurance. And we know while we are carrying a particular percentage for health insurance, we know we'll get the actual number and that we have every reason to believe that that number is going to be better than the number that's in the budget. And so we will have an additional opportunity and be able to look at our restoration package before we actually meet again, actually by the time we do that finance meeting on the 11th. And so, you know, while there's certainly some difficulty in this budget, which I think we've been saying for quite some time and known for quite some time there was going to be, there's also going to be some additional opportunity to look at that restoration list within the next 2 weeks. So our plan for the 14th is that in addition to Mr. Rowe presenting the overall budget, the numbers, as he says, I present the picture book and he presents the numbers. We also will have an addendum. We believe every indication is such that we will have the first addendum to this budget by then. And we have, as some of you know, we have great information about the GIC because Mel Kleckner, our town administrator, now sits as a board member at the GIC. So, so I have every confidence that we're going to see a better number by then. The third piece is that I have a very strong belief that people should not be surprised, employees should not be surprised by the budget message. I can tell you, speaking from experience, that that's not the case in every district. My wife can certainly tell you the case. She's had that experience as a classroom teacher of learning about a position reduction from the day after the superintendent's budget message. That doesn't happen here. It may happen once in a while by accident, but we've put a lot of planning into the days leading up to this to make sure that we talk to people about what might happen in this budget. And we've gone far beyond who might be the person or people impacted to start talking about what some of the ripple might be, and talking to those people as well. And while that's certainly difficult, those are difficult conversations, we think it's much more important for people to have that information before I stand in front of you than to find out the next day in some other way. So let me take you through this budget. Let me say two other things real quickly. We did not come to this message lightly. As many of you know from the budget meetings that we had, two things that I want to mention in particular. We've pushed very hard on other potential sources of revenue. We've looked at some sources of revenue that, quite frankly, you know, I think we'd hear similar comments to what we've already heard. That is, they're very un-Brookline-like. They wouldn't fly here, those kinds of things. And yet we explored them to the 9th degree, right? In terms of seeing if there was something in that that was more acceptable than some of what we've actually built into the superintendent's message. And in some cases, we've built one of those revenue enhancements in. That has to do with athletic fees, and it's quite a change. It's quite a modification. But in other cases, things like, and I'll say it here, it was a discussion among this group, it was a discussion among the leadership team, and that is charging for full-day kindergarten was considered in this budget. That's how dire the circumstances are that we've been talking about for quite some time, and was not built into this budget after consultation with a number of groups, including our leadership team. We also looked at every opportunity we could find to reduce expenses that did not take jobs. And you'll see a number of those in here where senior staff members have been exceptionally creative in finding ways to make grants work more in our favor and yet create more opportunity to continue to employ teachers. And there were some of those that are beyond our control where we made overtures to other groups that affect some of our expenses, and we were rejected. But we've tried a number of different means in terms of making this message work to continue to provide classroom teachers, to continue to provide quality programs for kids in this school district. And so there was a lot of work that went on behind the scenes and pieces that never appear in this message that were explored in terms of getting to this point. So so let me talk about what is here. So our budget goals, which are, I think, consistent with what's been put forward in previous years and consistent with certainly the budget guidelines that we're given in these times of great growth and difficulty in terms of expenses and state revenues and local revenues and certainly federal revenues yet to come. We're to spend our scarce dollars to keep teachers in classrooms with students. Remember that during this period of time, one thing that we're exceptionally proud of is during this period of time of unprecedented growth in this school district, our average class size has ticked up by about 1 student per class. By about 1 student per class in that period of time. And we're very proud of that, of being able to do that. We've kept our dollars, if you look at our budgets over the last number of years, those budgets have been spent on teachers. And we believe we continue to do that in this very difficult spending plan. There's a focus on teaching and learning, program review, professional learning, and data analysis. That is, there's a real focus on providing those teachers with those classroom materials that are necessary. There's a real focus on our professional development program, a continued focus on our program review process. In fact, you're going to see a restoration in here where I've banked that potential restoration on the program review process. I've handed over the potential for for what we may do with that program if it comes back through a restoration to the program review committee. That's how much we believe in that process and that team. And improve student learning and special education in order to better serve our students and their families in Brookline. It's no accident that that's underlined. In a cost-effective manner. You're going to see programs and instructional models proposed tonight that we believe build upon our ability to keep Brookline students in Brookline in quality special education student service programs. And while I absolutely pay attention to those comments that are made about the high school programs, I remember a year ago, Mr. Morris, I remember being there, a forum I did with the high school, with CPAC, but it ended up being a high school forum, right? Which was all about what we weren't doing. And to hear that people are expressing optimism about the direction we're headed, and I believe that they will see more of that in this message tonight, is a very positive sign. And Sarah Orloff and Deb Holman deserve a lot of credit for the work that they've done there and the recommendations they made here to build upon that work. So in terms of the opportunities and challenges in this budget, so we have a House 1 proposal that for I think the second or third time since I've been here the town has not used. That is that you know that the governor proposed his initial budget based on an income tax increase and a reduction in the sales tax, with
a lot of money provided for Chapter 70 school funding and money provided for a transportation infrastructure. Because it's based on those tax increases, the town has chosen, as I said, I believe for the second time, not to utilize those numbers. The first time, you may remember, is when a budget was proposed that was banked on casino revenues. But what the town did is it used a number similar to last year's. That is a continued march toward a new floor of 17.5% of the foundation budget for those school districts at the lower end of state revenues, and we are one of them. So while we didn't use House 1, we'll pay attention and see what happens as House 1 is considered by the House when they release their budget in April, and it's possible that there may be adjustments upward from where we presently sit. Health insurance projections, I said earlier, it's projected at 5%. We believe the number is going to come in better than that. Last year, just for reference, the number was 2. In fact, we had some health insurance plans under the GIC last year where people saw where because we changed the percentage, remember the percentage doesn't change again this year. We're at the 83% the town pays, but last year, because of the combination of that low percentage and the change, low percent of increase and the change in percentage of what an employee paid, some people actually are paying less for health insurance this year, right here. Tufts plan for Brookline employees, they're paying less in premiums this year than they paid last year. And that's not the only one among those plans. So we expect to see rates in that range, and we'll have that final number on March 6th, we anticipate. And local receipts is the other opportunity where they are holding steady. There were some slight opportunities built in that are described here, but essentially our local receipts are healthy. Challenges are enrollment increases. While you're going to see here that over the last months, while we've been talking about the possibility of another kindergarten class at 660 students, we've now revised that estimate to 600 students. And someone said to me the other day, isn't it great that the class sizes aren't as large? And I thought to myself, wow, we have a new reference point, don't we? When 600 isn't large. When I came here, they averaged 420 to 440. I still think 600 is large, but it does not, to the point that the person was making, it's not the number of classrooms that we were anticipating at first. But we could be wrong, and so part of the conversation we're going to have tonight is about our need for additional contingencies, if in case we're wrong. The collective bargaining agreement, which is essentially a 2%, I'm talking mainly about the teacher collective bargaining agreement, is 2% with a new top step. When you factor in the cost of that collective bargaining agreement and the cost of steps and lanes, this is an agreement that is worth $3.5 million. The message shows a net cost of that collective bargaining agreement at $3.1 million, and that's when we factor out an anticipated savings from people who leave the system and from retirements. But the cost of that collective bargaining agreement is $3.5 million. And that includes steps and lanes. Circuit breaker is level funded in the governor's proposal, but that's a little misleading. It's level funded at a point after a 9C cut was taken this year. So circuit breaker was reduced in the course of this year. It's one of the factors that led to our shortfall, you will remember. It's been level funded at that number, not at the original FY13 number. So there's a challenge there for us. And the federal budget, when I said negotiations, Mr. Rowe said, or lack thereof. But there is this issue of what impact the federal budget could have, what sequestration could have on our budget. And I have a slide here later on that shows you what we think the impact might be. So the revenue growth, very simply, out of the town school partnerships, about $3.5 million. There's no increase in circuit breaker. Materials fee, that $50,000 does not come from an increase in the rate of materials fee, but it's an increase in the number of students. We know right now that the increase in the number of students in the materials fee program, that being the program that allows employees who do not reside in Brookline to send their children here, is at least 20. The net increase is 20. We actually believe it'll be higher than that at the end of the day, but we factored in a figure off of that 20 student increase at $50,000. Food service, we've proposed here to continue our efforts to having our food service program pay their health insurance. And that means taking an additional $50,000 from food services. And Mr. Rowe will make me try to explain, probably laugh while I do it, why that says a negative 100. It's because once that money is with the town, it then gets factored into the town-school partnership. Thank you. And once it's factored in, it ends up showing up as a negative. And if you have any questions on that, I'll be happy to ask Mr. Rowe to explain them the answer to you. Athletic fees, we have proposed an increase from $200 a sport to $300 a sport for our athletic fees. One piece on that, $300 is much more in line with what Bay State schools charge. $200 was at the extreme low end of our particular conference. And so we've proposed an addition to that fee, and that will generate another $100,000. We've proposed a change in the way we collect fees. Right now, in early education, in summer school, and in athletics, those fees are collected in those departments. And that's not an efficient way to do it. It's not a consistent way to make sure that scholarships are applied. And so we're proposing a change in that. We're proposing a change to a central not administrator, but a central clerk who will manage that collection system. And I believe conservatively, based on my experience in another system, we're essentially proposing here $50,000 in, $50,000 out to pay for the clerk. I believe that in the course of 1 year, or certainly over time, that will turn into something that will generate more revenue than we're generating now. And I think more importantly, consistent application of our scholarship guidelines. We've proposed using $50,000 from reserves, and I'll say it this way, which are not normally calculated as part of our reserve figure, for an issue that I know we've discussed now for at least 2 years. And that's the issue of the access to technology for our students at the high school. We've said here a number of times, and our students have come before you and said, that the great news about the robust wireless access at the high school is that more teachers are relying on it and using it and making assignments using it and asking students to use it in turning in those assignments, etc. And that has accentuated the downside of the issue for those students who do not have access. We have students right now, students who go to our MSAN conference, who are studying this issue to try to come up with what those numbers are. And quite frankly, we've now just thrown a number in there as a placeholder to send the message that we intend to make sure that our students have access to the technology that they need to meet the requirements placed upon them by the teachers at Brookline High School. More to come in March on that. And utilization of reserves, this is just to say that our budget last year included $350,000 of reserves. The budget this year includes $350,000 of reserves. That leaves a net balance in our reserves of $400,000, which this year we've targeted as part of our special ed contingency. We've named it. It's always been part of the contingency. We've named it in this budget as a contingency. And so there's projected revenue, new revenue in this budget of $3.6 million. So 2 areas that continue to be of concern. Medco funding is level funded in the governor's proposal. That's a cut. That's a reduction in spending capability, because that goes toward paying teachers, it goes toward paying the Medco staff, and those costs increase. So that's a level funding, and we've seen level funding for quite some time, along with a number of 9C cuts to Medco over time. That's a reduction. In our federal and state grants, we've been told by the commissioner to figure a 6% reduction if sequestration were to happen. Remember, for us, that's no impact for FY13. That's the current fiscal year. Sequestration would have an impact beginning in August or September, whenever the federal grants begin. So that's when we'd see that applied. One other note I put in federal and state grants is just an acknowledgement here that the Steps to Success program's Teen Advantage program at the Devotion School has federal dollars in it. And there's two things going on with that funding. First, the funding's up, and they have to reapply. Second, sequestration may hit it. So there's a twofer going on around that program and the potential loss of the funding for that Teen Advantage program at Devotion School. So here's the 6% scenario, right? And you can see, as we discussed yesterday, that the majority of the potential loss in this 6% scenario is in special education. But there are a number of grants, and by the way, we just threw them all in. We don't know which of these sequestration might apply to, but we believe there's a maximum exposure under a 6% scenario of $190,000. That as we get further along, if we see that that's actually going to occur, we're going to need to make some decisions about, because as was pointed out yesterday by committee members, the rules around the implementations of a number of these programs don't change, right? It's a loss of funds with the same requirements. It's not as if we can say, well, we're not going to do, you mentioned ESY, we're not going to do this component of ESY. Well, we are going to do that component of ESY. We're going to do it with $120,000 less, which is, this grant's a major supporter of our ESY program. So this would be very problematic for us in moving forward in a number of these areas. But again, it's here now. There's no allowance for this in our budget planning. None. Other than to continue to acknowledge it. So, in terms of spending priorities, I've broken this presentation down into these 5 areas. Program improvements and innovations, enrollment-driven priorities, and by the way, these are artificially created categories. You may put something in a slightly different category. Supplies, materials, and consultants, contingencies, and general operating expenses. And I'll take you through these one at a time. If I can find my place, it would be even better, he said. There we go. Okay. So first among those is our continued focus on literacy and the Literacy Collaborative. So in this, we propose to add, I believe it's 1.3 FTE at schools that are involved in the Literacy Collaborative. That is to support those efforts. So 74,000 of this funding is for staff. 21,000 is for the training for these people through the collaborative. We actually expand a grade span in this. We don't expand to another school. We didn't do that in this budget. We didn't feel that we could. But we did expand into an additional grade span. That is, our training to date has been in K through 2 at the schools that have gone into the collaborative work. This adds a grade 3 to 5 component at the Runkle School, and it also adds training around a middle level component. The second major issue has to do with our LLD instructional model. This is Brookline High School. So as we've talked about since we began discussing this budget, we have a significant number of students who are involved in elementary programs in this particular disability category, or who could benefit from this kind of support when they arrive at the high school. This $165,000 pays for the staff to support that program as outlined here. And I'll go into a little bit more detail about the goals of this particular program in a moment. The advisory program is something that currently exists at Brookline High School. However, the great work that's gone on this year is a partnership between the 21st Century Fund and our offices, Amy Martin in particular, who've gone in and evaluated the program, made some proposed improvements to that program to the point where we believe that this warrants, as the 21st Century Fund discontinues their funding for the program, it warrants funding by the school district, and that will cost us $60,000 in terms of staff, stipends, and summer training for the people who do that work in those advisories. Earlier I showed you $50,000 in for the technology access. I'm just showing $50,000 out. I don't know right now if that's the right number. We will know that as we talk more with our students about what we need to do to fund this sort of mini one-to-one initiative, if you will, for our students. The fee processing is exactly the same model. That is $50,000 in. We believe we can generate at least that much in additional revenue off of this change in model, and it will cost us $50,000 for this person. Let me say one thing that I'm going to talk about in a little bit around this particular area as well. The other thing that it gives us in combination with our present high school registrar position is a parent center. So we believe that these positions, when staffed in the right way and working with adult education and our BCASA people and some others, and this is a presentation yet to come this month, we believe we can establish a central registration place for all of our families so that they have one place to go. It's not the superintendent's secretary's office, because that's where they go now. And it gives them the kinds of information that they need about their elementary schools, the kinds of information they need about the town, all those kinds of pieces that we quite frankly don't have now for the lack of a parent center. And we believe we can do that essentially at no cost by reconfiguring where we have these people stationed. And Claudia in our adult ed office is very, very excited about being part of this discussion. A number of years ago we came before you and we proposed as one of the first districts in Massachusetts to start a Today's Students, Tomorrow's Teachers program. This is a program to incent high school students of color to pursue teaching as a career. It gives them, if they participate in the high school program, it gives them the opportunity to go on to a college at reduced tuition if they agree to come out and teach in a Today's Students, Tomorrow's Teachers district. We have 5 terrific young people who are presently in the program, next year going to their junior year. And we propose now to start a second cohort. Many districts do a new cohort every year. We didn't feel we could at that time. We feel we need to now. This has been one of our goals to address this issue in terms of our staff. We think an important part of that strategy is a grow your own strategy. We think it's important to be partners with the Lexingtons and Worcesters and districts outside of Massachusetts so that at some point we have access to those students as they graduate from college in addition to our own who want to come back and teach in Brookline. You're going to see later on a reconfiguration of our coordinator structure. One of those coordinator structures that's changed is that in performing arts. We've added some supports within that program. One of them is someone to work with the individual who provides our technical assistance in that area. So this is a paraprofessional who would work with that person. And I've described in the narrative is essentially what that person would do in terms of access to the auditorium and the kinds of responsibilities that they would perform. But this is part of that package of the coordinator structure that the headmaster has proposed. We've proposed an inclusion facilitator as part of the LLD program at the Driscoll School. This is a person to work with those students, to work with that program in terms of their inclusion in regular classes at the Driscoll School. We've proposed additional support, a paraprofessional in transition and inclusion support at Brookline High School. The main purpose of this role is around job coaching, is around transition services for students who are nearing the age out point at age 22 and who are making that transition from the school to the world of work or community service. And this is a person who works with them in that role. There are 2 paraprofessionals proposed that would support learning centers in 2 of our elementary schools. I believe that's Lincoln and Baker. These are places where we do not where we have a number of students that now warrant this number of paraprofessionals to support those learning centers. And the town, we're actually very excited that the town is implementing a new human resource information system. We need to have staffing to be able to do that work. This will give us much better access to licensure and other information that we need for decision making, and quite frankly, for some of the requirements of our collective bargaining agreement, and for some other additional information that we need to provide to our employees on an annual basis. We're very excited that we finally are going to have some access to this kind of system, and the cost to us is $30,000 to make sure that we have that. So that LLD instructional model at Brookline High School, you'll notice me pause once in a while when I get through LLD and then say instructional model. I've been coached effectively by Sarah Orloff and Deb Holman not to call this a program. It is not. It is not. It is a and there it says program goals, right? It is designed to provide specially designed instruction in language-based approach in regular education classrooms, to provide individual language-based and reading instruction on a daily basis 4 times per week to meet the high school schedule, to weave language processing and linguistics into the fabric of the school day through instruction, coaching, and appropriate materials, and to provide routines and structure and a system of support for enhanced organizational and executive functioning to support students' academic success. As I said, and I'm not sure I gave the number this time, I have in the past, we believe that there are at least 15 students over the next 2 years who have need of this instructional model, and quite frankly, whose parents will look elsewhere should we not be able to offer the instructional model that meets the needs of these students. We want them at Brookline High School. We believe that they belong at Brookline High School, and this is the way to make sure that we can continue to provide the appropriate programming for those students. You'll see later on that there's one other component of this program, and that's the professional development for classroom teachers and for the special educators. And that's our partnership with Landmark School, right? We've had an ongoing partnership in some of our elementary schools, and Landmark will be stepping in to help us work with those teachers around what that co-teaching model looks like in those classrooms. So enrollment-driven priorities. So again, even at only 600 new kindergarten students, sorry I had to say once, given the numbers who are advancing now into 7th and 8th grade, which is where those first groups that came to us that identified that we might have an enrollment issue are going, we believe that we need, it's 8.2 FTE of additional K-8 classroom teachers to meet those needs. They are across our schools. That part of the message is provided in the document that I've given you. And you'll see later on that we've actually scaled back on our original proposal of kindergarten, but this is not kindergarten, and these are not impacted by whatever the size of that kindergarten may be. These are impacted by the size of those groups advancing into 5th grade and 6th grade and 3rd grade and the additional needs that we have there. So $470,000 for classroom teachers. There are additional components built around those students. So one is paraprofessionals. We have put a paraprofessional or an intern in every KN1 to great impact over the last number of years. It's provided an ability for those classroom teachers to do great work, and it's also cut down on the number of 1-to-1 paraprofessionals and 2-to-1 paraprofessionals that we've seen in later grades. It was done with a goal in mind of providing the support early so that students would have that support and could quite possibly, in some cases, not need that support later on. And that has happened. We've seen our numbers of paraprofessionals essentially even out while our enrollment's grown. We have some schools where there are more first grades next year than there are first grades presently, and so we've had to budget for 2 additional paraprofessionals in order to make sure that we can continue to provide that support. Elementary classroom specialists, these are and we've added some to this category this year. This is physical education, performing arts, visual arts, ELL, elementary world language, and health. And again, this has to do with those growing numbers of sections, which are driven by the growing number of students that we've seen in those upper grades. So as those students, those larger groups advance on into the upper grades, we need 3.0 FTE of specialists to meet their needs, to meet the number of sections. And that's a cost of $172,000. We've added in this budget a nursing sub. I will tell you that we had requests for second nurses at a number of our schools. Those are not unwarranted requests. We believe that we can meet that model for at least one more year by adding this everyday system sub, who, when there's someone out, will obviously be the nurse in that building. But we've looked closely enough at the absentee patterns to know that there are a number of days when that person's not, when the nurses aren't out. And on those days, we can use this person as the second person at some of our larger schools. And so we believe we've approximated some of the demand at some of our schools with this approach. And we've added a third team facilitator at Brookline High School to handle the number of IEPs and team meetings that are demanded there. We will then have, I believe it's 2 secretarial positions in this that support those team facilitators at Brookline High School. So I mentioned this before. Our current projection is 600 kindergarten students. Our current kindergarten is 667 kindergarten students. We've made an enrollment-based adjustment down of 3 FTE teachers and paraprofessionals, which is a savings of $233,000 over where we were when we started this conversation. Let me say one word about this, because inevitably when I've had this conversation to this date, people say, so where are the sections? I have no idea. Actually, I have some idea. That's not quite fair. I have some idea, but it would be crazy for me to say now, there are going to be this number at this school where there's this number now. I know where some of the lighter enrollment patterns are, given the first round of registration. I know, for example, I'll get in trouble for saying this, I know, but I know, for example, that the number at Pierce is the only school where we saw an increase this year over last year. Remember, last year, 667 students. If this year we're targeting 600, obviously we've seen decreases at most of the schools, but not at Pierce. Pierce actually is larger and, quite frankly, considerably larger. However, there's noise in that number, right? The noise is how many of those students are core, how many of them are buffers, those kinds of things. So all that has yet to be done. So I have no idea where they would be. I know where Mr. Rowe and I would like them to be, but I don't know where they'll end up falling at the end of the day. And we won't know that for quite some time. What we know is the best information we have now says we're going to be down 3 sections, 600 students total. And we've gone through our enrollments in essentially, I'll say, grades 1 through 5. And we've looked for potentials of consolidation. We've said, where does it look like if things broke in the right way, we could go from 4 sections to 3 sections here? Okay? And we've identified 4 or 5 of them. And I've built into the budget my belief that of the 4 or 5 that we've been able to identify, that we can actually consolidate 1 of them. Now, I hope that we can consolidate more, but I'm willing to budget 1. So those are reductions in terms of this enrollment-driven aspect of the plan. I won't spend a lot of time on this. I should, but I won't. In terms of teaching and learning and student services, we've budgeted a $140,000 increase and a $75,000 increase. Most of the teaching and learning increase has to do with the Literacy Collaborative, which I talked about earlier, and has to do with materials for new classrooms, and replacement textbooks. There are other pieces in here around program review, and I'll leave that to your reading of the message.
But those are the major areas of the increase in teaching and learning. The major area of increase in student services is the landmark consultation to the Brookline High School LLD instructional model. 30,000 of the 75,000 is there. Okay? So in this budget, we've identified, well, that's in special education, that should actually say two things. There's a $250,000 reserve in the budget for special education. And then we've said there's the $400,000 that is in our reserves. I know this is jumping a slide that comes later, but in terms of that number, we have an opportunity this year in special education with respect to out-of-district placements, in that for the second time in I think the time that I've been here, we have a pretty significant number of age-outs in our out-of-district population among some students that are high cost, residential placement. And so we've been able to take advantage of some part of that in terms of factoring those contingencies. In regular education, the present spending plan, before any restorations of dollars that may come in the next 2 weeks, the regular education contingency is 0. Which is why you'll see it as the first restoration in terms of things that we'll address in the next 2 weeks. And again, we're confident enough that we're going to see something, at least of that $200,000 figure, that I was confident enough to build the budget in this way. In 2 weeks, I believe we'll be having a very different conversation about that contingency. And in grants, there's no contingency at present. Normally, our grant contingency has to do with Title I and those kinds of things. And sometimes in the past, we've said, well, then we just won't spend the funds. This year, we have a little more complicated problem that we'll have to monitor throughout the coming months. So I talked about collective bargaining. I won't go over that again, but in terms of general operating expenses, it's about $3.1 million with an assumption on our part of a $450,000 savings coming about as part of around retirements and staff turnover. Transportation costs are slated to increase by $70,000. Some part of that is an increase in our contract. That contract increased by 2%. Some part of that is the shortfall from this year, which was about $40,000 that we now have to build into next year's spending plan. Our custodial contracts, that's our contracted services for our private vendors, increased by 2%. That's the $20,000. And then, as we've told you over the months, the good news is we were able to meet our goals in terms of the FY13 budget freeze by removing certain items from the spending plan. The bad news is that if we wanted to have those items going forward, we had to actually then restore them, build them in as new to an FY14 spending plan. We've chosen to do that in some limited areas here. We've not built everything back in. You've heard us say a number of times already, one of the things that we did not build back in is the Director of Data Management, a central office position. We did not build that position back in to the budget. It's not here. We built back in a clerical role in elementary world language and science. We built back in the first grade paraprofessionals at Baker and at Lawrence School that were factored out. We built back in the associate dean role at Brookline High School. We had someone take that from guidance, and we essentially glommed the two positions together to get through the remainder of this year. And we built back in a number of dollars around professional development, our core professional development, responsive classroom, and other initiatives in teaching and learning. So that left us with a number of areas that we still had to reduce. You'll notice at the bottom we tried to start out with some items that did not impact people. That is, areas where we felt we could be creative. One of those is in terms of last year we spent $95,000 out of our spending plan, out of our budget, on a wireless initiative. We did phase 2 of a 3-phase wireless across the district. Cost $95,000. We believe we have $95,000 left to go to finish the district
that's been built into the capital improvement plan. So it allowed us to remove that $95,000 from our spending plan. We've removed people, if you will, from our Title I grant. When we build people into that type of grant, we must pay the state 9%. We must pay the Massachusetts Teachers Retirement System 9% for the privilege of building people into the grant. It doesn't go toward their retirement. It goes toward the general retirement system. But when you don't build people in to those grants, you don't have to pay that. So if you build things, materials in, you don't run into that issue. We believe, by our examination of what we're spending our dollars on in literacy and math, that we can build things in and remove $98,000 of obligations. That is, pick up $98,000. So before we started again to look at positions, we had identified almost another $200,000 that we were able to remove in this creative manner. But we were still left at the end of the day with having to make some proposed changes, some of which are identified in restorations later on. So in the budgetary reductions, we have, as you've heard already, proposed here the removal of the Enrichment and Challenge Support Program, which is the coordinator, the teacher, and the paraprofessional position. I'll make some comments on that more so when I get to the restoration list, because that's built in there. A piece of that's built in there. In the second item, contractually, we owe every teacher at the elementary level 5 preparations per week, 1 each day. Historically, those preparations, and I'm underlining that word, those preparations have been 2 periods of physical education, 2 periods of music, and 1 period of art. Now, there are other things that teachers accompany their class to during the day. In many schools, it's the library. They're also with them in elementary world language. So there are other times when someone else is working with the class, but the classroom teacher is there. I'm talking specifically about the 5 times that are identified as preparation periods. Okay? So what we've proposed here is a changing of one of those 5, a modification of one of those 5. The other thing I should tell you before I sort of explain the proposal is that some of those are 40 minutes and some of them are 30 minutes. So the music, for example, which is the one I'm going to talk about here, has always been 2 times a week. One of those is 40 minutes and one of them's 30. Okay? In this proposal, the 40-minute general music class for kids in K through 3 remains a prep. It remains in that prep rotation. Okay? But the 30-minute as a prep is gone. And the substitution is something that's been one of those other periods where the classroom teacher has been historically with their class. Okay? In some schools, not in all. And that's what's tough about doing this, is we have some work to do on this, on what it may be. In some cases, in the future, at some schools, it may be a 30-minute period with a librarian. In some schools, it may be with the ETF, the technology specials, ETS. We don't know how this will play out. We're still working out how it will work per school. But what we know is we have the capacity. We know we have the capacity to do it in terms of what's been done historically with those periods that classroom teachers have accompanied their students to. We've proposed the elimination of 1 elementary math specialist. In this model, we will go back, as it says in the message, and take a look at the positions that are remaining and apportion them by our enrollment throughout the schools. We will guarantee each school a 1.0 in that apportionment, And we know that there are some schools that have grown so quickly that they will actually benefit by a reapportionment, even in a cut. The Driscoll School is an example of that, where we know that formula-wise, there's additional staffing driven there, even in a reduction, because of how fast they've grown. We've proposed relooking, I think this was a suggestion from some committee members, and Deb Holman embraced this, to look at our low enrolled sections at the high school. We've proposed that we believe we can look at least 6 sections. That's a 1.2 FTE and save $61,000 in terms of looking at the number of enrollees in classes and not running classes at some of the lower enrollments. There are 2 positions that are tutoring and support services, one that exists at Devotion School, one that has existed for the last 3 or 4 years at the high school. Total value on those positions of $22,000. One's a math tutor, and we've proposed eliminating those positions. With respect to our tutorial program, I have a slide later that addresses tutorial, and keeps tutorial at 16.2 FTE in the spending plan. We have, however, reduced the role of the teacher leader for the tutorial program. Historically, that's been a 0.8 role, with that person teaching 1 class and having 4 of their class assignments to work with tutorial. We've reduced that to a 0.4, meaning that individual in the future would teach 3 classes and have 2 periods for that teacher leader role. And finally, in this reduction package, we've consolidated some coordinator roles. The 2 coordinator roles that we've consolidated here, one is across K-12. We've historically had a role of elementary performing arts and high school performing arts. They've not been 2.0. You'll notice in the message that the reduction there is 0.6, and that's because of some of the teaching responsibilities that those people have maintained. So it's not a full coordinator reduction. We've suggested combining those roles into a K-12 coordinator of performing arts. That's why we've suggested that technical assistance position that you saw earlier, and there's a teacher leader role also that takes place in this budget around drama to assist this K-12 person at the high school. The other position that we've suggested is an elimination of the role at Winthrop House, an elimination of the role Pardon? Thank you. In OFC, and the creation of a coordinator of alternative programs that would work with OFC, Winthrop House, and our Excel program with teacher leaders in each of those programs. So I only want to focus on a couple of these. Some of them I've actually talked about already. I've talked a little bit about the Parent Center. I've talked a little bit about outside placements and the issues there. Our paraprofessionals and interns, which we continue to support at KN1 in this budget. The early education program, we've proposed a 3% increase to maintain our ability to meet the rising costs. Steps to success, you will notice in terms of a financial issue, public housing has had to back away from about a $15,000 commitment that they make to one of the positions that we've had to absorb. They now will support one of the positions at about a level of about $10,000. 21st Century Fund and the Brookline Education Foundation continue to be great partners around so many of these initiatives. One I didn't mention that really falls within that big umbrella of literacy is their work with us around the Content Reading Initiative, that initiative at the high school that's working with a number of our departments across the high school in supporting students in their reading in the content area. But you could do this presentation, and you know that we do from time to time around the number of initiatives that these 2 organizations support that benefit our students, that benefit our budget, and allow us to continue to provide some of the innovative programming that we do. And I won't focus at all on classroom and program relocations. That, quite frankly, is its own message, as you heard in the B-Space conversation and others tonight. But that continues to be a budgetary challenge. For example, as we talk about the continued need to move some pre-Ks out of pre-K to 8 schools, we have to worry about the administration of those places. We have to worry about who evaluates, who supervises those programs, who evaluates those teachers. It becomes much more complicated when we aren't talking about sites that are within schools anymore, but we're talking about adding to the number of buildings that we have where we have programs located. And we have added to the number of buildings where we have programs. And we'll continue in next year's budget to add to the number of buildings where we have programs. So, I want to spend some time both in this area and then in the restoration package talking about technology. So let me focus on this CIP issue first. So Kevin Stokes, Scott Moore, Sean Cronin have been terrific to us in terms of beginning to look, as we've gotten ourselves to a place where we can talk more intelligently about technology planning for the future, in terms of supporting those efforts in the capital improvement plan outside of operating budgets. The three areas where we're doing that next year to $175,000 are finishing off that wireless infrastructure proposal, putting funding around the instructional model at Brookline High School to make sure the classrooms that students are in are equipped appropriately for that LLD instructional model, and in terms of educator evaluation, making sure that our evaluators have the tools that they need to implement the new law. And we've been able to embed all of that in the CIP going into next year, and therefore removed it from the necessity to try to build it into an operating budget that was already way too tight. We anticipate that we'll be able to do more of that in FY15, 16, and 17. And I'm going to continue to urge the committee to make that a priority. Because as much as I agree with people who stand before you and talk about our ability to differentiate and our ability to enhance the rigor of our classroom and our need to do that, the fact of the matter is that we can't do it with the technology program that's in place in this district. We can't. We simply can't. And until we get ourselves, I think the word that we've used way too often, although I'm going to continue to use it, you're going to hear it lots this spring, is leapfrog into a place where we are equipping our teachers with the right kinds of things to do their job, where we're equipping our classrooms so that we can share information, we can share classes across our 8 schools, as I just saw when I was in Phoenix in the Paradise Valley school system, and their 5 high schools. Then we can't provide the kind of enrichment opportunities, we can't provide the kinds of opportunities that we need to provide for students. So as important as ECS is, and I'll talk a little bit about that in terms of restoration in a minute, as important as those kinds of programs are, the fact of the matter is we have first of all, we have a number of other components in place. We have a grade acceleration policy. Other systems don't. We have a subject area acceleration policy. Other systems don't. We have virtual high school that we've used strategically in those areas. Many school systems don't. But we need to make that next effort to make sure that we can provide this kind of programming both across our system and outside of our system. And so that's why you're going to see, as part of the restoration package and as part of our discussions in FY15 and 16 and 17 in terms of that capital improvement area, an emphasis on the technology plan that we're putting forward that we believe will allow us to leapfrog to those steps where we can provide all of our students with that differentiation and those opportunities that they deserve. So this is part 1, and it's already in the capital improvement plan, and thanks to Kevin and Scott and Sean Cronin for their efforts to make sure it was there. A moment on 4+1. I often talk about tutorial. Remember, 4+1 is a bigger umbrella than tutorial. It actually has 2 main components. One is the tutorial program, which is the 5th teaching assignment for many teachers at Brookline High School. It allows them to work with a small group of students. It allows about 220 students to get additional help that they need in subject areas. But the second part of 4+1 is a world language component that allows for students who are coming to Brookline High School and enrolling in the first level to have classes that are co-taught. That is in smaller groups because of having 2 teachers with them. That's a second part of the 4+1 program. All in all, the 4+1 program at the high school is 16.2 FTE. That's separate from that teacher leader. That's not included in that, the reduction that we've made, and is a cost over $1 million a year. The headmaster feels very strongly about this program and about what it does for all students by allowing teachers to teach 4 classes. We have made an effort and will over the next year see if this venture, as I've said here below, is meeting its stated goals, and examine, most importantly, the sustainability of this program as we have a high school that's going to go from 1,700 to 2,500. All things for our FY15 spending plan by our recommendation. Ongoing initiatives, this is just to say, you know, I'm sorry to say that we have some things that we don't talk about in the budget message because we fund them. We're funding them again. We'll fund them again, right? And so they get sort of glossed over, but they're important parts of who we are. They're important parts of our program. So we've spent some time this year. Just recently, you reauthorized the master plan for social competency and bullying prevention. We've been able to put into place the Olveus program. We'll be doing the survey again with students coming up this spring. And it is a robust effort that meets not only the letter of, but the spirit of the state's law around bullying prevention. And we're very proud of that. Virtual high school I talked about earlier. The curriculum efforts, curriculum revision efforts that are going on, particularly now in social studies and science, and what that brings to all students in our system. I want to say the efforts that go on across subject areas in curriculum revision. I've seen great evidence of our literacy coordinator, English language arts coordinator at the K-8 level, working with science to make sure that we're bringing in appropriate books for people for students that work across science and English language arts. And so I've seen some great partnerships across the coordinators to make sure we enhance the curriculum in each of those areas. We believe, by all the feedback that we get from parents, that our team facilitator model is a success. 5 years ago, when I would go to CPAC meetings, they would talk to me about who is the person I call. That's not a question anymore. There are other questions. That's not the question. There are identified people who people can go to around their IEPs, the implementation of the IEP, beyond the principal within each of those buildings. And it's a great model, and it's been a great model in terms of serving students, and we believe making sure that students are more and more getting the services they need in regular education where that's possible, outside of the need for an IEP as well. African American Scholars, you know about the program. We took that back from the 21st Century Fund a number of years ago after they helped us for a year or two in terms of funding that program. Provides a lot of great coaching opportunities, a lot of great classroom experiences for students of color to support them in taking upper level courses, and the Calculus Project, which has been a terrific part of our opportunity to make sure that students of color can not only enroll in upper level classes at Brookline High School, but succeed when they get there. Remember that the years before the Calculus Project, when we looked at our junior level and senior level math classes, upper level classes, there were zero African American and Latino students in those classes. And those numbers have moved dramatically in the years since the Calculus Project, both through the coaching opportunities, the preview opportunities that exist during the summer, and in terms of the support that goes on during the school year for those students. So, I kind of telegraphed most of this, huh? So, in terms of improvements and restorations, which sometimes we've waited 1 or 2 or 3 school committee meetings, we will have an addendum 1 for you on March 14th.
I don't know what the amount of money is that we will be dealing with. But among the issues that we will be considering in that package of improvements and restorations will first of all be a general education contingency, which will be the first $200,000. I don't want to be coy at all about that. It will be the first $200,000 identified for inclusion in this budget. We have a technology package that we believe brings us to a point where we're providing all of our teachers with what they need, that not only that outfits a number of our classrooms, and that Scott Moore and Kevin will come to talk to you about at one of our March meetings as to what that would do were we to be able to fund ourselves at that level in the coming year. We've proposed putting a potential restoration around enrichment and challenge support in the hands of the Program Review Committee. Dr. Fisher-Mueller and I have outlined some parameters around what we'd like to see them use as the decision-making model in that, and they have a due date in there. I think it's the end of May, but we'll be looking to provide some support for some sort of model in terms of a restoration of an enrichment and challenge support program in the improvements and restoration. And finally, last year we added for the first time a second vice principal at one of our elementary schools. That's the Devotion School, a very large student population. And quite frankly, two others of our schools have progressed to the point where we should be considering some additional support in terms of vice principals. Those are the Pierce School and the Baker School. I don't believe we're going to get there. Okay? But it's an area that we've continued over time to emphasize to you that while we think we've done a very good job of keeping up with some of the other specialists that actually are in front of students and teaching, we've not done as great a job in this growth in some of these areas like vice principal, counselors, some of those areas in terms of meeting those numbers. Strictly by putting those positions in. We've provided other kinds of supports through Brookline Mental Health, et cetera, but the positions are largely what they were 5, 6, 7 years ago. So I've just outlined in terms of this technology piece the priorities addressed in the spending plan. I've mentioned to you in some detail here this last one in that list of the access gap for Brookline High School students. We believe we have a proposal in the spending plan that does some part of that, providing administrators with tools. That's in the CIP, the special education initiatives, the robust wireless environment. They're all in the CIP. There's no increase in our technology budget in the base budget. However, our recommended next steps are around our aging classroom computers, appropriate computers to teachers. I want to come back to that in a second. Equipping our classrooms, basic projection capability, and outfitting our special education learning centers, which we believe puts us in a position to talk more intelligently with the town about that FY15, FY16 capital improvement plans and those next steps that are necessary to do some of the things that I talked about earlier. One thing I want to make sure I point out here is you will remember the feedback, I'm using a nice word here, the feedback that we got in the high school accreditation process around technology. That is not limited to the high school. That is about teachers who are coming on in this district and looking around and saying, this is what I have to work with in Brookline? Are you kidding me? And it needs to change. And it's going to take a bold effort, like saying we're going to take X amount of those reserves. We're going to build it into the capital improvement plan. Dare I use the word, we're going to make sure that it's part of some override effort down the road. It's going to take that kind of effort to make sure that we can provide that access for teachers who, quite frankly, can get it everywhere else. And here's what I've described in enrichment and challenge support, that I've asked the Deputy Superintendent to work with the current ECS Program Review Committee to deliver a recommendation for a new district-wide program model by May 31st. I've given some staffing elements, talked about including strategies for collaboration with parents and members of the community, volunteers, continue virtual high school. Actually, I would say there, if possible, to expand virtual high school, to continue the process for grade and subject area acceleration, maximize the potential of technology, ensure that opportunities are available to all students,
to ensure that students own their learning and develop a sense of responsibility for their own learning, and provide adequate funding for professional learning. That's the set of recommendations, the parameters for the set of recommendations that I'm looking for. And then I'll just come back to the budget goals, which is where we start and where we end. So this has been a very, very difficult process, and as I say, I think in the closing of this, I don't believe we're there yet. And I'm counting on additional opportunities in the next few weeks to be able to move some things around and better address some of these goals and the programs that we want to make sure that we keep in place to benefit our students. And I look forward to standing in front of you on March 14th and talking about addendum number 1. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Lupini. Questions, please. Ms. Kershaw.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As the chair of the Finance Committee, I wanted to make a couple comments, and then I have a question for Dr. Lupini. The school committee, see this very much as a partnership effort with the administration, and this was an incredibly difficult year to face this. We have spent months looking at a picture that has growing enrollments, increases in costs, and decreases in revenues. And there was no way that a budget was going to be able to come through that scenario without pain and disappointment and things we didn't want to do. And I want to say that I'm very proud of this budget, because I think it would have been very easy for us to say, well, it's a difficult financial year, let's just maintain everything we have and do an across-the-board cut in everything a little bit, and we'll just keep what we have, but we'll erode it all a little bit. And we didn't do that. We turned over every rock. We took a scalpel instead of a sledgehammer to the programs. We prioritized evidence and research-based initiatives. We exceeded legal requirements when we felt like it was in the best interest of our kids. And I'm proud of that. I think we were creative, and I think we were, and I think we made some really difficult decisions. And I feel proud that we can put forward a budget that continues to move us forward around innovations, around technology, around our commitments to children in special education, and I think around children at all levels of the academic spectrum, and also that we can fully honor our collective bargaining agreement. So I want to thank you, Dr. Lupini, and also your senior team for the really creative, I know you've been working long, hard hours to turn over every rock and make decisions that could keep us moving forward. So I want to thank you and also the members of the committee for their support during this difficult process. I also just have a question about the academic rigor side of sort of our approach in general, and I know it's something the Strategic Plan Committee has been discussing. You mentioned virtual high school and our acceleration policy. I wonder if you could discuss how specialists in the schools and curriculum coordinators, if they also address learning, maybe the Literacy Collaborative, and whether those sort of broader curriculum-based efforts, are those targeted at just our underperformers, or are there also aspects of those programs that cross the achievement levels for our students?
Sure. Dr. Fisher-Mueller.
Thank you. So thank you for the question. What we are coming to understand very, very well is that rigor is about the intellectual engagement and deep thought of children about their learning, and that relevancy plays a very strong role in driving that rigor and that challenge for students. Now, those two pieces, rigor and relevancy, do not have to rest in a program. All right? Those are about curriculum. And then those are about teachers having the skill to actually differentiate for their children in that classroom around that curriculum. And curriculum coordinators are now, with me, all of us collectively, looking at this rigor and relevancy, that element of curriculum development, and being very intentional about building it in initially, not once we have the learning expectations going back and building it in.
Thanks.
Ms. Cotto.
There are two areas of the reduction that concern me, and I've brought them up before, and I just want to mention them again. One, of course, is the enrichment and challenge support. I am interested to see what comes of the restructuring if we can add it back, because I think the school system really has an obligation to challenge children who are what we would in the old days call gifted, and also to challenge others who might not be what we would call gifted, but who have gifts in special areas. And I think that's a difficult task. I am hopeful that if this can be added back, that in the restructuring we can find a way to do this. And until we know whether that will happen, I will reserve my judgment on that. The other piece I want to talk about is the prep period piece, and I mentioned this yesterday. It does concern me that teachers might not be going with their students to things like the instructional technology class and to the library period. And I'm going to talk particularly about the library period because I think so many people think of library period as, well, the kids go and change their books and the teacher reads them a story and then they go back to the class. Well, if that's what's happening in the library period week after week, then it probably doesn't make a great deal of difference. But many of the librarians, if not all of the librarians in Brookline, work very closely with the teachers as part of the academic program. In many cases, I think teachers are signing up for library periods because they're working on particular projects instead of having an existing period every week. So that's going to be challenging to see how that is managed. But our librarians are not the old-fashioned librarians. They are library teachers. And as such, the teachers in the classrooms need to work collaboratively with them, and they need to be there while those lessons are taught. So that's an area that's the second area that I have grave concern about. As well as instructional technology. If you're using that as part of your program, generally it's the teacher, at least when I was there, it was the teacher in the class, in the computer classroom, and the instructional technology teacher often wasn't even there or might be working in their office, and it was the teacher working with the students in that classroom. So I think that these areas are problematic in a whole lot of ways, and I hope that we can think about that as we move through this budget.
So can I just comment on that? So I would agree, particularly with the last comment that you made. These issues are problematic, and we had to make reductions. We had to propose reductions, right? And so we did, in terms of what I laid out up front, we tried to do those around those core objectives in a situation that in many ways is no win. We said up front this was going to be a difficult budget. Quite frankly, 2 months ago, we were talking about this being a $2 million shortfall. This didn't end up being $2 million because we got some decent breaks and because, quite frankly, we made some of our own. But I don't disagree with what you said about those programs. The only exception I would take is, again, I don't believe that gifted and talented programming, or that addressing the needs of all students is a gifted and talented programming. I believe it has a number of other tentacles to it, and I think we've started to build a number of those tentacles, and I believe we've continued some of that in this, and we will continue with the technology piece that we've laid out, and in terms of some potential restoration. But I would have said that about anything that we might have built into reductions. We were going to have reductions, and they were going to require us to be creative and look for ways that we were going to have to change practice because, quite frankly, we couldn't support everything that we were doing.
Ms. Ditkoff.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I too appreciate how much thoughtfulness went into a 16-page, single-spaced, with no margins, budget message in 8.5-point font, perhaps. And in fact, there were a fair degree of numbers in there. So anyway, so thank you.
Yeah, good.
There were numbers. I saw them. They had dollar signs and M's and K's and everything. So thank you. This is a tremendous effort. And just to echo what Amy and Barbara said, clearly again, you don't grow this much and experience reduced revenues and not feel pain somewhere. So that's fine. I think one of the favorite phrases from 2008 was, how do you turn a crisis into an opportunity, and some people, yourself included, find that a problematic statement because it sort of discounts the actual pain of the crisis itself. At the same time, to the extent that we can turn the conversation around challenge and rigor into, if we were to start today knowing everything we know now, what is the program we would build?
Right.
And how would we build it? That's a different conversation. And so I guess one of the things that I'm excited about is the program review team for ECS and your mandate to them. In full disclosure, I have children who are benefiting from the ECS program and a particularly gifted educator at the Driscoll School where they attend. So I have some personal interest in this, but professionally, a lot of the conversations that I'm in my work life are about not only how do you increase rigor, but how do you increase rigor with equity so that it isn't just a pull-out model for a couple kids who happen to make a lot of noise or happen to have a good teacher, but it really is about raising the water level for everyone, especially, and I think someone said this earlier, the equity issue being true where certain parents can pay for, can access, do understand how to look for out-of-district supplementary opportunities, and other parents perhaps who are lower income, don't have English as their first language, don't have that knowledge or access or financial means, don't have it. And then you're creating essentially an achievement gap at the top level by saying that it's okay because some Brookline parents will always supplement. So anyway, I deeply believe all this, and I guess my question is that it's almost an even bigger challenge to that ECS program review committee in a way, and to the district and to us, is what would it look like, right? So if we're talking about, and I guess my fear, and that's the exciting part, my fear is that it's going to be expensive, by which I mean it's going to benefit potentially more children, challenge more children than the current ECS program does, but it's not like just rolling it into everything else will be free. So for example, if I think about all of the curricular extensions that are needed pre-K through 12 that we don't currently have to challenge, let's say the top 30%. I'm not interested in the top 2 kids in the class. I'm interested in the top 30% who aren't finding this meeting their needs. That set of curricular extensions is a new cost that we would bear. If you think about the assessments needed in terms of the conference-based assessment, forms, the end-of-year conference forms that kids go through and rolling that out, if you think about formative assessments, summative assessments, much richer engagement with technology, those things are expensive, as are all the professional development needed to differentiate for advanced learners, which I think differentiated instruction is hard enough. And so, and let alone all the technological support. So I guess all I would say is that to do this really well, there still is a leap to make. And while this gives us an opportunity and certainly a way to move away from a limited model where a few students are affected perhaps, and towards a model where much broader numbers of students are affected and challenged. If our goal is something like every child challenged at their level, I anticipate that is an exciting conversation, and it's one the Strategic Plan Committee is having. It's also not a free conversation, so I just want to set that out as well.
Other comments? Ms. Stone.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Like everybody else, I have both sympathy and admiration for what you've done here, so thank you for all of that. I had a couple of, mostly I just wanted to do some clarifications. A lot of this we understand through your presentation about its impact on the system and its impact on the teachers. In a couple of places, I'm particularly concerned just to understand better the impact on the students themselves. And as a as a person who has been a lifelong involved in the arts and believes very strongly in the contributions of the arts to learning overall, I'm concerned, as everybody else is concerned with different aspects of this, that that we seem to be hitting the arts and music for some of these savings, which has a cost not just in education around arts and music, it has a cost in education more generally because of what study of those things bring to them. So, for example, the impact on students of the prep time, you presented it to us very clearly as what we're saving, and saving the obligations to teachers so that they have those really important prep times. But the impact on students is going to be, as I understand it, is it K through 3?
The loss of one 30-minute general music class in K through 3 per week. The retention of one 40-minute general music class in K through 3 per week, which is the equivalent of what art is and has been. Okay,
the 140-minute.
The 140-minute.
Okay, and our assumption is just that, especially in K through 3, the classroom teachers are incorporating music in many different ways already in the curriculum. Is that something that we assume is going to happen? No? So it's just a loss of that period. Okay.
Yeah, I will say, I mean, again, this is a separate grade span, but the one thing I will say that we've built in budgets over the last number of years, as you go back through messages, you'll find, and I know you know this, we had quite a discussion and quite an enhancement to what we do at the middle level in terms of the program. This, by the way, maintains the instrumental program. This budget maintains the band program. A number of years ago, we enhanced that middle level program. One of the things that we brought to that discussion was the music production class, which is flourishing across the system. Those were ads, right? At one time in the system, made a program that at the middle level, at one point, I think 9 years ago when I came here, which was nothing to write home about, into something that people now are very pleased with, and that we have students attempting to register more and more to get involved in these different activities.
Right.
So you're right, this is a loss at that K through 3, but budgets, I think sometimes we have to go back and look at over periods of time and look at those enhancements.
Right. There's no question,
well.
and I think the protection of our instrumental music is a terrific thing. That's something everybody counts on, and it's a wonderful piece. So the other place I wanted to understand better the impact on students is with the performing arts consolidation. I sort of understand what that's doing in terms of instruction, but what is the impact on students of that consolidation? Will there be any in terms of the courses offered in performing arts?
I believe that there'll be a close examination of a lot of different classes. Some of them will be dance. In terms of the numbers of sections offered, that'll fall under that consolidation of some lower enrollment sections. Quite frankly, we've let some ride over the last few years, even though they didn't meet our requirements anyhow. So that doesn't have much to do with that coordinator consolidation as it does just our enforcing the policy that we have in place. In terms of the other aspects of it, no, I think if Deb Holman were here, she might talk about some pieces like a teacher leader in drama as enhancements that are built into that reduction. So there is some refinement in terms of the coordinator role, again, now to match the fine arts coordinator role. But there are other enhancements, the tech person, the teacher leader, that we think will enhance the high school program.
Okay, terrific. And my final question is just about the one-to-one program that we're starting to build. And I'm curious, when we heard from the students, and certainly when we've talked about technology access, we've talked both about access to the hardware, but also the importance in our internet-driven world of access to high-speed internet. And I just wondered how much of that anticipated growth in the one-to-one is about the internet access.
Yeah, so we have a bit of a disconnect here, and I need to do some additional work, as you know, through the Steps to Success world, in that we have students reporting a lack of that connectivity in terms of their housing, and yet public housing telling me that it's there and it exists. So I think we need to get a better answer, because quite frankly now we're getting at least 3 or 4 different answers.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Dr. Warren.
Thanks, Bill. I join my colleagues in thanking you and your staff for doing this. It's difficult to operationalize the strategic plan on an annual basis at a time point where you don't really have all the information that is necessary, and so you need to put forward in a practical way a lot of the priorities. I just have a couple of observations and questions. And on the observation side, the obvious risk for budgeting for classroom reductions in the elementary area is that you could be wrong. And also the aging out of the residentials.
Yes.
That could be compensated for by some move-ins.
Yes.
And those can happen very suddenly. So
Yes.
I think that you have some courage in budgeting these as permitting other expenditures, and we'll see whether or not these predictions become true. The other thing I'm concerned about is the number of vice principals is something that's concerning because it's going to affect the teacher evaluations, and that's a strategic necessity for us moving a larger system forward in a sensible way.
Yes, so to the latter point first, and then I want to comment on your other point. So, we didn't add vice principals and we cut coordinators. So we've decreased our capacity for educator evaluation if we continue to assume that the only way to do educator evaluation, that the only model possible is with administrators. There are districts around the country that are involved in peer evaluation models. And we've seen some of that work. Jess Wender-Shubo and I have seen some of that, and it's possible, and there are great programs out there. There are great models out there. But for the coming year, we've decreased our number. We've decreased our capacity. To your other point, I think Mr. Rowe must have put you up to that comment because on the aging out in particular. But we haven't taken advantage of all. We took advantage of some part of it, and we said the other $250,000 we're just going to leave there, assuming some of that's going to happen. And that's the way that business goes. I mean, I know not everyone's familiar with that, but someone was saying this to me yesterday. It may not have been a school committee member, someone else, who was here on the day that we were talking about this in a budget planning meeting, and we were talking about this very topic, and walked out, and there was a gentleman waiting to see Mrs. McHugh, who had moved here from out of town and was bringing us the out-of-district placement papers as he moved in. That's the world we live in. That's the world that we live in. And that's a cost. That student clearly belonged in that placement, clearly needed, in that case, that placement, and we had a new expense that we didn't have 5 minutes earlier. So I think we've allowed for some of that. You're right on the enrollment piece, which is why we need to take that contingency to that $200,000 figure, because given the weather that we experienced during the first round of registration, there are people who believe that 600 is not the right number. And if it isn't, we need to have the capacity to be able to move on that. And I believe we will in 2 weeks.
I just have a couple of other things. I think that I've been really impressed with the presentations that the administration's made on the social competency and bullying prevention. I think it really has the potential for revolutionizing the environment in the schools and really producing a level of stress reduction in the elementary schools that will lead to the potential for greater academic and social good than exists now, particularly as in the fashion in which the schools have implemented it. So I think that it's probably well worth the substantial amount of time takes a number of the elementary schools to implement this, and it does take a huge amount of time, not particularly with the building administrators, the vice principals and principals. So I certainly applaud it, but I recognize that it's an expense. I wonder, can you comment a little bit on the implications of naming the $450,000 as a contingency now, as opposed to in prior years when it existed as a contingency? Is it sort of closer to the edge? Are we pushing the chips toward the middle of the whatever portion of the board means that they could be lost?
I'm not sure we would have done that if we'd been able to name a general ed contingency in this budget. I think what I wanted to make sure that we were doing, to your point, as that number's reduced, that is, it was $750,000, right, and now it's going to be $400,000, is to make sure that that number's here, right, as we deal with the first quarter report, a second quarter report. So yeah, I think it's more an awareness factor than anything else. It's always been available to us.
Thank you.
Can I just say to your other point that one other group that I would mention in that are the building level teams of teachers who've been involved in the efforts to plan the implementation of the curriculum efforts. And those people have done great work with their principal, with their vice principal, in terms of making sure that this was a meaningful exercise, again, that we met not only the letter of the law, lots of people are doing that, but we believe we've met the spirit of what we were intended to do under that law.
Well, I just want to add a couple of things. First of all, I want to thank the chairman of our finance subcommittee, who in a particularly difficult year really managed a very collaborative, albeit difficult process between the school committee and all of the staff, Dr. Lupini and all of the other folks who are here, who I thank very much too. But thank you very much for having navigated us through, I think, one of the more difficult budget times that we've had. And I just wanted to acknowledge that I think that what you've accomplished here is more than is obvious. And I'm just going to tick off a couple of three things. You've mentioned them, but I don't know that it was so obvious. One is that we had, for this budget year, a $600,000, we were facing a $600,000 deficit, and we've covered a lot of that in this budget going for, both for this year and next year, with some sacrifices. And we had to do that before we got to next year. Secondly, you mentioned the LLD instructional model, which I think, if I'm not mistaken, probably will save us a substantial amount of money in terms of out-of-district placements. That's not so obvious. And I think there's quite a bit of money, I didn't total it all up, in technology, even before the hopeful add-backs, that's going to the CIP, which also gave us some additional flexibility.
Yes.
And just for the public, I want to make sure that they understand that before we had to get to really some tough decisions, there was some substantive magic there, which was very impressive, and I thank you. If there are no other questions.
Two more quick comments?
Yes, please.
Actually, mainly just one. So I don't normally do this. You know, I work with a great senior staff, and three members are here: Dr. Fisher-Mueller, Dr. Allen, and Mr. Rowe. The one person I want to make sure I mention, who, by just what you see in this message, was an amazing contributor, is Dr. Karen Schmuckler, who has taken over the interim role during Dr. Esposito Balboni's absence, and done an amazing job. I mean, look at the detail of what we were able to build into this spending plan with someone who essentially stepped into that role on an interim basis on January the 3rd. She's done amazing work for us over that time, as has the entire department, but led by her efforts and her contributions to this budget process. Both, I will say, in and outside of special education, have been that of a true senior staff team member, and we appreciate her efforts very much.
Great.
Timeline, just real quickly, that was my second comment. Remember, I really sound like I'm trying to buy time tonight, and that's only because I am. That's why it sounds that way. So we will have something to talk about at the March 11th meeting. It should include some updated news on health insurance, because we're slated to get that news the middle of next week. And then we come back on the 14th. Our presentation will be twofold, therefore. We anticipate an addendum to this message, and then Mr. Rowe delivering the full budget message that night. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Lapini. Is there any new business that anyone would like to bring forward at this time? Hearing and seeing none, I tell you that we have to have an executive session tonight, which just came up, and there's nothing I can do about that. I was going to apologize for it, but it doesn't make any sense for me to do that. The session has to do with strategy with respect to litigation in the event an open meeting might have a detrimental effect if the public body and the chair, that is, that the public body and the chair so to declare. Sorry about that. Okay, so Ms. Coyne, can you poll the committee, please?
Mr. Chang? Yes. Ms. Stone? Yes. Dr. Warren?
Yes.
Ms. Kershaw? Yes. Ms. Fox? Ms.
Yes.
Yes.